Welcome to the Growth Pod. Today on the podcast, we have Karen Roberts, who is a fitness industry veteran, and she made a bold leap into the digital space. Having interviewed countless coaches, consultants, therapists, and healers for her own podcast, Karen has uncovered a common thread: the power of sharing personal stories to expand influence and audience reach. Currently, her podcast, The Podcast Profits Unleashed, is ranked in the top 1% of all podcasts globally. Karen empowers others with coaching services and comprehensive post-production support through her business, ensuring her clients not only reclaim their time, but also achieve a tangible return on investment for their podcasting efforts. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I am so excited for our conversation today. Obviously, podcasting is something that we both love and use to grow our businesses. And today, you are going to be sharing how we can leverage podcasting not only for business growth, but personal growth as well. But before we get started, can you share a little bit about why you're so passionate about encouraging business owners to launch their own podcasts?
It's really comes from me starting out podcasting, really, and hearing people's stories. Because I don't know about you, but you can get a bio from somebody or you look at somebody's website and you might have a preconceived idea as to what it is they do because they have this title of a business coach, a mindset coach, and it doesn't really explain specifically what it is they do and how they help their clients. And it's only when you bring them on the podcast and you ask them questions, and by the end of it, you've got a completely different story created in your head about what they do. So for me, it just feels like this is such a powerful platform because it allows people to not just share their story, but to demonstrate exactly what the transformation that they offer when people come and work with them. That a website by itself or social media posts can't do.
I love that. I think in a world where everyone's pushing for short form content, just what you said, podcasting allows this longer conversation to take place. And the other thing I think is that people have a little bit more patience to hear what you're saying. They're not like, give me my information that I'm looking for in a second, or I'm scrolling on to the next video. So I love what you're saying about not only does it create the space, but it allows you to tell a stronger narrative about what you're doing. So with that, we kind of touched a little bit on this, but what do you feel is the biggest difference between using that social media versus podcasting for business owners? Is there anything in addition to creating that time and space to tell your story that is beneficial only in podcasting?
It's massive. And I think even more so now with the rise of AI, because anybody can create a post. You can go to ChatGPT and you can create a post. It doesn't mean that you have any experience, that you are actually capable of helping somebody achieve a specific goal, because you can just put content out there that isn't your own. The thing with podcasting is that you get to show up as your authentic self and you build on the know, like, and trust factor through the content that you're putting out. And because it's conversational, it's not scripted and it's not written by AI, you got to know your stuff, right? And so I think that comes across within a podcast rather than, yes, you can write anything on social media. So I think with the rise of AI, I think it's even going to be more important for people to have their own podcast to demonstrate their skill set and clearly build that know, like, and trust factor so that people really know that they know what they're talking about and that they can actually help people.
I love that. I think it gets back to, you know, how people were designed to communicate, which was conversating. You can write something in a social post and even do a quick video, but with this longer form content, you're able to, like you said, showcase your expertise and authority in your niche and create this stronger overarching narrative for your services. So you're somebody who's launched a successful podcast, not only for yourself, but for your clients as well. So what do you think is the biggest driver of success for someone when they're starting a podcast for their business?
If somebody's starting out, I think it's a case of just make a commitment to showing up. As I said, podcasters, it's you build on the know, like, and trust factor, right? And podcasters are the most trusted form of content creators out there. And I think that is because if you make a commitment to showing up every single week, however long you've been going, I can look back now, I'm about 3.5 years in, there's going to be that more trust because I have showed up once a week for 3.5 years. And in fact, the beginning of last year, I even increased it to 3 shows a week until I almost hit burnout in July. So I only did it for 7 months and came back to doing once a week. So you've built on that already. So I think for somebody starting out, I think it can be very daunting because you think, who's going to listen to me? And, all these sort of imposter syndrome issues come into play. But if you just make that commitment and don't worry about the stats, because the stats are vanity metrics, really. It's about creating the right kind of content that is going to attract or even create your ideal client. And as long as you just do that, you keep showing up to serve and be somehow, I know it might sound easier said than done in the beginning, but be detached from the outcome, you will grow your tribe, as it were. Because the beauty with podcasting, the way I see it, is that those who aren't interested aren't listening. So there's no rejection. You get to show up and serve those who are listening. So it's just a wonderful platform. There's no resistance. You're not trying to sell anything on your podcast. It's just allowing people to get to know you. And as I said before, I know we throw this word out there a lot, but your authentic self, because you might be able to keep up some kind of pretense in the beginning, but over time, it's not going to happen. You're going to show up as you. So the people that do resonate are the ones that are going to follow you. So it's perfect because you are showing up to serve those who have already resonated with you. So I used to say 80% of it is just showing up, but then I saw a post a little while ago from Stephen Bartlett, and I'm going to take it. He said 99% of it is just committing to showing up. And I do agree with that, as long as you just keep going, because so many do give up too soon because they're looking for that quick fix. And this isn't a quick fix. It's a marathon and not a sprint. So, you do you keep doing you, and you will attract the right people for you.
I love what you're saying about continuing to show up. When I launched my podcast in January, I did, I think, 8 episodes, which most podcasts don't even make it to 8 episodes. And I was in a really busy season in my business. And I said, I'm just going to set this aside and come back to it after I get through this busy period. And no kidding, 1 month later, 2 people reached out to my business email asking to be on my podcast. And so even though, you're not thinking that your podcast is really having an impact in those early stages, I was really just figuring out how to podcast. There is still value that's being created for your audience. And like you said, by continuing to show up over and over and over again, you're sowing all of these seeds, not only of trust with your audience, but that consistency and clarity over time when you're podcasting.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. You don't know who's listening. I mean, it's funny. I look at the stats and I think, oh my goodness, there's more people in the States that are listening to me than in my own country. Like, I don't know why. You have no control over who's listening. And that's what makes it actually remarkable. So it is a case of just keep going, because you don't know who's listening, and you don't know who you can be changing lives. Anything that you can do, if you're inspiring people to create a change, if you've made a difference in one person's life, then it's been all worth it. So just keep going.
I love that. So, we've talked a lot about the impact that your podcast can have, not only on yourself, but also your listeners. And now I want to learn a little bit more about the impact that it can have on our business from an ROI perspective. So, how does a business owner get ROI from their podcast? You mentioned it's not necessarily a place to sell. So, at the end of the day, how are we going to use this as a driver of growth for our business?
Depending on the business, I mean, there's different ways. So I know a lot of people when they start a podcast, they just want the numbers, right? They just want to grow their downloads. And yeah, maybe eventually they can have ads inserted and make a little bit of side money for just showing up. And yes, of course that is possible. But again, that's not going to happen straight away. Now, for others, the way I teach it is if you're a coach or an expert, rather than having ads inserted, I mean, admittedly, I do only at the end, the very end, because my intro and my outro really is an ad for my business. So I want people to come through into my world. So it is about thinking about the content that you're going to create for each episode. That's number one. But also, how are you going to turn the listeners into leads? Because, like I said, you're not selling anything on a podcast. Nobody's going to buy a high ticket offer direct from your podcast. Nobody's really going to book a call direct from your podcast. However, if there's something that you can give the listeners that's of value, obviously, and not a cheat sheet, not a PDF, not a downloadable ebook, but some kind of immersive experience that the listener will get a little bit more of an idea of what it would look like to work with you. So there is no resistance. You can turn the listeners into leads and bring them into your world. So it's it's twofold, I suppose. Some of it you're going to get an ROI, some directly from the podcast. Yes, if you have ads inserted, yes, that's a definite thing. But indirectly, I know that I wouldn't have made a lot of my sales if I hadn't had my podcast, right? So again, the podcast is building on that know, like, and trust factor, and it's validation that you are in business, you've been in business for years, you know what you're talking about. So indirectly, you're going to get an ROI as long as you keep bringing people into your world.
I love what you're saying about using the podcast as a way to get people into your world. In January, when I started my podcast, I was reading Expert Secrets by Russell Brunson and also Traffic Secrets. And he shares about when he first started his podcast, he had no way to check the statistics. And so he had no idea how many people were actually listening for the first 3 years. And what he found out is that a lot of people who joined his high ticket mastermind program, they all came from his podcast because they were able to create that know, like, and trust factor with him. And the way that he explained it is somebody would come in and listen to an episode that really resonated with them for whatever reason. And then they would go back and binge his entire library and really listen to what he was saying. And then they would take the next step because, of course, his whole thing is sales funnels. And so he would direct the traffic, just like what you're saying, to get them off of your podcast and into your systems. And so, even though, like you said, there might not be a direct ROI, a crazy ROI in terms of like the ad revenue that you're generating, the longer term play can lead to those high ticket sales, which is where that growth comes for your business. So, if somebody is looking to launch a podcast this year, what are some of the trends that they should be looking out for?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm not really sure about what the trends are. I mean, the trend is it's all going up. There's never been a better time than now to launch a podcast. As I said, because I think the shift in everything on social media, everyone's fighting for attention. You see, they're fighting for attention. But what are you doing on social media? You're scrolling. You're not really paying attention. You might, hit the like button, but everybody's looking at those stats. They're irrelevant. It doesn't matter how many likes you get on social media, they don't necessarily convert into sales. So the difference is with a podcast, you get to hold the attention. And you said something earlier, which I want to pick up on, is the fact that people then will binge listen to. And this is the beauty of a podcast because it's evergreen. If somebody does find a particular episode that resonates with you, that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to go back, but it's not you putting it in front of them. They've chosen to go back and binge watch. And that's very, very important because, like, even when I say when you bring people into your world, ideally, I suggest to people now, there are other opinions, right? Not just my own. But even if you're going to say, send them a sales video or a webinar, say even a 30-minute webinar, you're asking them to do a lot to sit there for 30 minutes. However, even if you broke that up into 5 minutes, a video series of 5 minutes, it still could be the 30 minutes, like 6 5-minute videos. But because you've broken it up, you've given the listener control of whether they binge watch it or not. And more often than not, they will binge it because the power is with them. They are in control. And I think that is massively important. When I say that you're not selling on a podcast, people are listening in the comfort of their own home, car, or the treadmill or whatever. They are in control. So if you give them an immersive experience where they opt to binge listen or binge watch, you're going to have a much better result because they've made the decision themselves rather than you telling them to go and watch a 30-minute video. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And it goes back to this concept that I like to teach about, which is creating psychological safety in everything that you're doing in your marketing. And I think this really takes that concept to the next level because you're giving the power back to the person who's listening. And so instead of, like you said, framing it up like this 30-minute webinar that you have to watch the whole thing, otherwise you're not going to get all the value out of it, and breaking it up into those chunks, now they're saying that was valuable. I want to listen to the next part. And it's giving the control back to them and creating this greater psychological safety in your marketing, which goes, on to creating that know, like, and trust factor and improving those conversion rates in your funnels.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Well, Karen, you are somebody who is very deeply entrenched in the podcasting world. You have a very successful podcast. You help clients with their podcasts. I'm curious to know what's next for you.
Oh, what's next for me is really to grow the network. I was very passionate about when I started. And initially I was just interviewing. So I wasn't doing any solo episodes. It was all about the guest. I'm very good at bigging other people up, right? And my sort of the guests were coaches, consultants, therapists, and healers, from the conventional to the more woo-woo. And I used to think, look, everybody's got all these different tools in their toolbox. There's somebody for everyone. And I wanted to create almost like this platform where the public could come and choose the right fit for them, because they may not need a business coach. Maybe they need to deal with their money mindset, money management, or maybe they need to do some inner child work. You don't know. So I was actually offered a radio station initially because I started on radio, and I thought, wow, now I've got a platform for others to get their message out there. Now, admittedly, it became a little bit too much for me. So I just continued with the podcast network. So, really, my mission now is to grow that network of lots of different types of coaches and consultants so that I can achieve that vision. So the public can come and find, oh, look, oh, I've never heard of that. I'd be interested in that, because you don't know. For me, my audience, say on Facebook, my friends, they're not interested in starting a podcast. However, on our network, we have this other coach that does something that they would be interested in. And that the whole point of collaboration rather than competition has always been sort of my thing. So the beauty of having the network is that every host gets introduced to everybody else's audiences and vice versa. And that's how we grow rather than trying to do it all by ourselves.
I love that. If somebody is considering starting a podcast and they want to learn more about your podcast network or just keep up with you in general online, what's the best place for them to do that?
Well, I do have a little bit of a free giveaway to your listeners. And this is not even if you're not looking to launch your own podcast, but maybe you'd like to be a guest on other people's podcasts and you want to know how to show up and shine. I have a freebie that I'd like to give away. You can find it at podcastprofitsunleashed.com, that which is the same name as my podcast, /free. And you can either go straight through the video training and do it yourself, or if you need a little bit of help for me to pull out the right story for you, then you can book a Zoom meeting with me if you need to.
Amazing. So if you're listening and any of that sounds good to you, it will all be there for you. Karen, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Growth Pod. If you enjoyed it, leave us a review. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.